We here at WKAR exist to serve Mid-Michigan with trusted journalism and local programming. Federal funding has been eliminated, which means community support is critical to sustaining this service and helping WKAR meet evolving community needs. Your ongoing support ensures public media remains freely available and locally focused. Become a sustaining member or upgrade your current gift today. Sustain what matters. Build what's next.
It's spring break. State lawmakers are not here, but Republican candidate for governor Ralph Rebandt is. He'll talk about his campaign, and we'll talk about the top news stories in our town this week. So sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much on this rainy Studio C day on Off the Record. Nice to have you back. Well, last week we were not here around the table to analyze, which is what we get paid to do, the Republican convention. So let's do it now. How did they do? What was the lead?
I would say for the first time in a while, Republicans seemed hopeful. There was a noticeable difference in the air when I was at the convention a few weeks back now, in which, people seemed enthusiastic about the candidates there, even though there was a little bit of partisan bickering here or there. It's politics, of course, there will be. It was the first time in a while that I remember Republicans being able to rally immediately around a Secretary of State candidate, immediately around an Attorney General candidate, and now they're full steam ahead, and that seemed to be the message was unity from here on out.
Yeah, they came out of this convention with probably the two most electable candidates for those Secretary of State and Attorney General positions that they could have.
Which wasn't the case 4 years ago.
Which was not the case 4 years ago, yeah. So, in some ways, is kind of a return to normalcy for the party, right? They chose experienced candidates who didn't have a ton of baggage, like some of the candidates 4 years ago. So you've got Anthony Forlini for Secretary of State, Macomb County Clerk, fairly well known, former state lawmaker, and you've got, for Attorney General, Doug Lloyd, who, has run in a purple county, won in a purple county, and I think remarkably, through that whole process, managed to kind of stay out of the super partisan fray. He was not forced to take positions that might hurt him in a general election, and now he's got a bunch of months to run as a moderate.
And he's a lawyer without problems with the Lawyer Discipline Committee.
Yes, that's a positive.
Chuck.
I think you've got it exactly right, and I think it shows the difference between a Jim Runstall running the party and remember Christina Caramo and those hairy days. And instead of the fringe candidates, as you said, they're going with the establishment candidates, which makes sense. We live in a purple state in which it tends to flip back and forth. If there's ever a time that Republicans are going to surge back into those key positions that they want in the state, this is their best opportunity to do so when Democrats are term limited out. And why put some fringe candidates that would be controversial? Go for the establishment candidates that hopefully can carry the party, but also get some of those independents in there.
What struck me is the convention 4 years ago was obviously Trump. Dominated, okay, and they went for this inexperience. Yeah. But now some of those same people show. What happened? Did they change the water? Did they change the medicine? What were the dynamics?
Well, I feel like the message was, we're tired of losing. When you put forward untested, unproven, fringe candidates on a statewide level, the name of the political game, first and foremost, always is to win. You want your candidates to win. And why would you shoot yourself in the foot at the starting line when you know, for instance, on the Democratic side, who has their convention on the 19th, where they'll be picking their own candidates for Secretary of State and Attorney General, at least with, AG, there's two proven individuals there who have backgrounds and proven track records in their field of law. With Secretary of State, you do have one individual, Barb Byram, who is Ingham County Clerk, who's running there. So you ran the potential of having somebody who had never served on any kind of anything before going up against an actual lawyer, which is, I guess, a little unfair to Kevin Kajewski. He is a lawyer there, but somewhat of a fringe candidate for Attorney General. And that's what changed, I think, is that Republicans finally asked themselves, are you tired of losing? And the answer was resoundingly yes.
And they're going to be running against Democrats who are going to constantly be using the name Donald Trump, who's been, whether you like him or not, he's been controversial. That's the one thing both sides can't argue about. He's been extremely controversial. They're going to try to use that as a wedge against Republicans. And I think Republicans are very smart in these candidates because they can say, look, as you said, these are candidates that have done the job that they're seeking. They're just trying to do it at a higher level. They have proven experience. Let's go in, trust them. Forget about what's going on in Washington. This is a whole different ball game.
Yeah, Chuck, you are right. Mr. Runstall was very happy with the outcome. And to his credit, he spoke to the elephant in the room, which is basically this. Getting the Donald Trump endorsement or blessing or even hooking up with him is great for a Republican primary. Yeah. But what about that pivot to the fall? And he conceded, he didn't use the word pivot, but you have to modify your message. He said, not change your beliefs, but modify your message to a broader audience, because if not, we lose. I've got him on tape saying that. And that's the popular. Are you surprised by that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Forlini.
He's right, of course.
I think Forlini managed to walk that tightrope fairly effectively, right? He dabbled in, election conspiracy stuff.
Yeah, just for a little bit.
Just dipped his toes in it enough to appeal to some of the folks who still have a lot of questions over the 2020 election. But he didn't go so far as to make, leave himself with huge liabilities in a general election. Certainly, Democrats will, raise issues with his attempts, somewhat discredited by the state, or mostly discredited by the state, to find non-citizens on the voting rolls in Macomb County. But he didn't. I think he benefited also that he wasn't the clerk in 2020, right? I think Republicans have a hard time electing an experienced clerk who also worked the 2020 election because of the baggage involved with that particular contest.
I asked him, do you want to change the absentee voting? He says, it's in the Constitution. Oh, I have no choice. Okay, we're not going to change the Constitution. He said, I can reform the department and, look at mistakes that were made. But he did not go into the pit of taking on all elections or rigged or stuff like. He would not go there.
Well, and that was something that he even said to reporters in not so many words when talking to us after receiving the nomination, is that, hey, the Secretary of State does a lot of things. And at the end of the day, that's mostly what citizens are looking towards the Secretary of State for. I don't want to spend all day inside a Secretary of State office. I want to make sure that when I go to vote, it's done seamlessly and my ballot is counted. I want to make sure that at the end of the day, I can feel happy knowing that I don't have to worry about whether or not my tab renewal is going to come in the mail. So long as you hit on that, that's really all voters are asking for, is someone competent who can do a job.
So meanwhile, Governor Whitmer has said she's going to watch the Secretary of State and Attorney General's races from afar and is not going to dabble with an endorsement. Surprise, surprise?
Not surprise. I'm sure that some of the candidates running are saying, darn, we didn't get her endorsement, especially probably her Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist.
He's 0 for 2 now.
Say, I was loyal, and what did it get me? But I think they will also understand that she has ties to everybody in this race in one form or another. She gets absolutely nothing out of it trying to get into the middle of this squabble. And she can tell them, look, you guys got to do, guys and gals have to do what I had to do 8 years ago. I had to go in there and I had to win it on my own. I'm going to stay out of it. You all duke it out. And then whoever wins that primary, I'm going to be 100% behind you if you want the endorsement, which I'm sure they will.
Is it getting nasty, ugly in the Democratic side?
I mean, there's certainly some very interesting races. I don't know how nasty it's getting, but
give it time.
You've sort of got the establishment, the union establishment, anyways, rallying behind Karen McDonald for Attorney General and Garland Gilchrist for Secretary of State. But their opponents are not going away quietly. They're not simply ceding that ground, and there's going to be a legit convention election.
Well, Byram basically said, labor ain't what it used to be. Okay, Walter Reuther used to tell the conventions what to do, and everybody said, we're in. Okay, those days are over, are they not?
You're absolutely right. I was just listening to Jim Hoffa Jr. not too long ago speaking before our audience, and he was talking about how the Teamsters have grown, but because they have diversified their membership so much from the old days when they were just seen as a trucking firm, and how the UAW membership has not grown, and because they have stayed kind of true to the auto industry and not as diversified as much. So it's not the power that it used to be in most of the unions, and people don't oftentimes follow what the leadership says, even though they may be a member of that union. People say, fine, that's what you want me to do, but now when I go in the booth, I'm going to do what I want to do.
We do see that in elections, but I would argue that the unions still have a pretty outsized role in convention politics, right? Because they get their people there. They and that's the question. Like Eli Savit or some regent candidates made a concerted effort to try and sign people up to the Democratic Party. There's a challenge there, and you got to get them.
Was Dana Nessel the favorite of the UAW?
No, she was not.
No, and who got the nomination, Mr. Osteen?
Sure.
Okay, I agree with you. If you get the bodies there, but the bodies still have to raise their hand and vote the right way.
Absolutely.
If they raise the wrong hand.
Absolutely.
But sort of like the Donald Trump endorsement, it oftentimes helps you more in the primary than it does necessarily in the general.
Yeah. If you want the best example of union leadership not doing well, George Wallace came into the state running for president in the presidential primary. Remember that? Mm-hmm. And Doug Frazier, I remember the look on his face. He said, "Don't vote for George Wallace." And what did they do? George Wallace won in this state, where there was union. They were embarrassed by that, weren't they?
Absolutely, they're embarrassed by that, and that's during the days when the UAW was considered stronger than it is today.
Yeah. Elissa Slotkin wants to be. No, she doesn't want to be president. She's open to president. Am I reading that correctly? Help me out.
What politician isn't open to the idea of trying to be president? I mean, we'll see what happens when it happens. It's still so far away. If I were a betting woman, I would not be betting on anything as of just yet.
But she goes into Des Moines, Iowa, to make this statement.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, she's obviously, you look back at some of the steps she's taken since being elected. She's on the path to run for president should she decide to formally jump in. She's making the rounds. She's going to other states. It's not just Iowa, but Iowa is where she was finally asked directly and said, I'm not going to say no forever. Well, I haven't ever heard her say no, to be honest.
Whatever politician says no to anything if there's an opportunity down the road. She's a pretty dynamic speaker, which could appeal in a presidential race. She has won very close elections, both her Senate race 2 years ago, but also, her congressional seats were very difficult. And she has made it a point to say, I want to help shape the party moving forward. I want to be the voice of a new generation of Democratic Party leaders. Certainly setting herself up for a run if she wants it. Is it fair to say that her bipartisan chops are pretty good?
I think so. I think so.
That's how she's certainly trying to position herself. And then when there was the big sort of crash and burn of Democrats in the recent election, she was kind of one of the emerging voices that was saying, like, Jonathan just mentioned, that we need to figure out a path forward because just sitting here and wallowing isn't going to be good forever. So again, and I wanted to bring this back to the endorsement convention for Democrats this weekend. I think that's another question similar to how Republicans have to ask themselves, do you want to win? I think that's a serious question that they're going to have to reckon with, specifically with Secretary of State. You do have some unproven candidates in that race. You also have candidates that come with some baggage. That's going to be the one that I'm watching. And obviously, you go back to Slotkin's bipartisanship. Yes, she has shown her bipartisan chops.
And I'll just add to that, she has carefully used her background from the CIA to, I think, her advantage to say, I am a middle-of-the-road Democrat. I am not out there on the fringe. I'm about protecting this country, and I'm about law and order, but I also am liberal on social type of issues.
Remember the pictures with George Bush and Barack Obama.
For sure.
End of story.
Republicans will point to her voting record and say, well, if you actually look at the votes, not necessarily super moderate, but she talks the talk, for sure. And she's a good communicator. She's a frank speaker. And we know from Donald Trump, no matter how partisan you are, if you speak frankly to people, they tend to listen and like it.
Well, speaking of people who want to win, let's call in our guest, a gentleman who's running for governor. Pastor, welcome back to Off the Record. It is good to see you again.
Likewise.
You are running again for governor.
Yes.
Last time out didn't go well. Explain to our audience what your path is for victory.
We have 5 lanes. I can't share them all with you because I'd have to kill you. But we have 5 lanes that some are wider than others, but it is looking really good. You mentioned the convention at the last segment, and I'm looking at the convention and I'm looking at the reception that we had there, and that just confirms what we've been seeing for the last several years.
Well, give me 2 of the lanes then.
Well, I won't give you the biggest ones. Law enforcement. I've been endorsed by the Michigan Chiefs of Police. Southeastern Michigan is the largest and probably the only endorsing agency, and they have endorsed me for governor. Another area is young people. We have young people that are coming in droves because they're looking for a candidate that's going to tell them the truth. So many candidates have lied, and we talked about professional candidates here, and as I was listening in the first segment, I'm just thinking that's not what we need is more professional politicians.
Pastor, you mentioned the GOP convention. On stage there, you said something to the effect of the establishment doesn't want a conservative pastor to be the nominee. Why is that?
You know, I don't really know other than they want to stay in control.
Who's they, and what evidence do you have that they don't want a Christian conservative pastor to be the nominee?
That's fair. I would say if we have time, I could open up emails and things that have indicated lies, as you mentioned. They will lie to you, lie to your face.
Who are they? Are these human beings talking to you?
They are human beings. I'm not sure I'm ready to throw them under the bus right now. If it continues, I will. I'd be happy to sit back here and just put the papers on the table and tell you who's done what.
Well, are they names that we would recognize?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Then why, sorry if this may come across as a little bit rude, but you just talk about your 5 lanes, you say you won't share some. You talk about people coming after you, say you won't share them. Why come on the show then if you're going to maybe be coy about, I guess I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, I'm not here necessarily at this point to cut down those who have closed the lane, but I am here to talk about policies that I have and things that I am convinced will be valuable for every citizen in Michigan.
Such as?
Such as cutting the budget, making housing more affordable, doing everything that we can. I'll give you an example. We've heard a lot about the property tax thing. I'm 100% behind removing property tax. I've looked at both property and income tax. Income tax only promotes the wealthy and helps people who have money. Property tax cuts rent for people in low-income zip codes. It helps homeowners. They don't rent from the government anymore. That's a big one for me. But in terms of the waste, fraud, and abuse, and I hate to use that word because it's been so overused, in Michigan we have that there. And one of the reasons why I'm jumping back in the race is the professional politicians that we have that I'll say opponents, they're friends, but they're opponents in this race, and you have to win. And one of the things that they've done is they voted for every higher budget that's come along. They've increased taxes, yet they'll sit in a debate and say, we're against taxes, Democrats want to raise taxes, and they've raised taxes. And I'm tired of people lying to the public, and I want people to know the truth, transparency, and honesty is what I'm about.
Reverend, we live in a very partisan society right now. Running for governor, if you got elected by the people, you would have to represent this entire state, not just one political party. What is it that you would do versus what your opponents say they may want to do that would bring people together in this state?
First of all, Chuck, I would listen. Right now, Winnie Brinks and Matt Hall have only talked once, as far as I know, in this year, 2026, and here we are in April. They've only talked once. They don't know how to talk. They don't know how to listen. And one of the things that a gentleman on my team said, Ralph, he said, Ralph, you are a lot like Gordon Geyer. You have the skill set to bring people together to talk without getting emotions raised. And so he said, that's why I'm supporting you. And he also brought up Tom Casperson from the UP. He said, you have the same personality that will make things happen. But that's one thing I would do, Chuck. The other thing I would do is, as I look at other candidates in their platforms, I hate to say I'm the only candidate with, but I am. I have a plan for low-income zip codes. I have a plan for people who may live in northern Michigan that don't have the opportunities that everybody else has. And the plan is simply this. I've talked with businesses from large businesses to welding companies, and I asked them some questions. I said, would you be interested in mentoring young people who want to become their own businessmen and women, because you're going to go out of business someday, or hand it on to someone else. Would you be willing to do that? And they've said, absolutely, yes, we will. And my whole goal is to reach into the neighborhoods in low-income zip codes, Chuck, because I have pastor friends out there that are in Detroit. One gentleman I met with 3 weeks ago, he doesn't like Donald Trump. But he, at the end of our 2.5-hour breakfast lunch, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Ralph, you're our guy. I'm going to pray for you right now. And he did. And when people see my heart for other people, you know, I want to bring everybody up. And even at the Saginaw debate, that question came up, how are you going to bring people together? And one of the candidates just simply said, I won't. Elections have consequences. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is really an odd answer for that. You know, I know that's true, but the problem is Republicans and Democrats have both said, sit down. We won the election. We're going to run it for 4 years. And you can't bring the state together like that. I've been bringing people together my whole
Have you ever
career.
voted for a Democrat?
No, but I would have voted for John Kennedy.
Well, he was a Democrat.
I know.
Well, that's one.
I was a little young at the time, but yeah, I would have voted for him.
Were you misguided?
I vote more for people and principles. And right now, you know, as I share this with you, Karen Whitsled just left the Michigan legislature, as you know, because she said their policies were inconsistent with her Christian faith. And I applaud her for that.
Well, you don't think Democrats have principles?
That's not what I said.
That's why I'm clarifying.
Yeah.
Pastor, on that note, 4 years ago, you said you wanted a Judeo-Christian state. You said that you didn't see a distinction between religion and government as being important. And you said you'd back a near-total abortion ban. Do you stand by those positions? And on the abortion issue, as governor, now that we have a constitutional amendment guaranteeing abortion rights, what would you do on that issue?
Well, let's go backward. On the abortion issue, when you understand a principle and you follow the science, not the so-called experts, when you care about women and the things that affect them, and you see the harmful effects of abortion on a woman, and there's statistics out there. I could just email you all the statistics, and there are statistics that people who are in the abortion industry don't want you to see. But to answer that question, even though abortion is in the Constitution, I will use my voice to warn people about its dangers and how it's harmful to women.
You wouldn't try and undo that constitutional protection or pass laws
Say it again, custody?
You wouldn't try and undo that constitutional amendment or pass laws to restrict access?
I would say that my vocal voice against that is what I would use, because I, as an individual, can't change that. But if a bill came to my desk to end abortion, I would sign that.
But would you introduce legislation that could nibble around the edges?
Well, again, I can't introduce legislation. I can influence it, but I can't introduce it.
Or would you urge one of your colleagues to do it?
I would do that, yes. I'm that strongly in favor of life, yes.
So if we report here based on that statement, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you would modify what the people of Michigan established in the Constitution, if you could.
Yes, because if you look at the voting that came out, it was the typical voting numbers. We've talked about Michigan being a purple state. I have traveled this state for the last 4 years, presenting America's Christian heritage and how it was the biblical principles, not only by the Pilgrims, but by our founders when they wrote the Constitution. Coming back to your question, obviously. I've been traveling the state for 4 years, and there are 1.6 million conservative voters, whether they're Christians, hunters, gun owners, who don't vote. And it's like a poll. People take polls and they get the results from their polls. I'm not convinced that everybody who holds my position in Michigan came out to vote in 2022.
Running for governor is also about moral leadership, and people oftentimes look for that. When you hear the president mock Allah, and when you hear him talk about wiping out civilizations and gets criticized by the Pope, as someone who follows the faith, your thoughts?
That tweet did raise my eyebrows and think I definitely would not have said it that way. I think you're right. You know, everybody talks about Donald Trump's mean tweets, and I realize that I will give an account for every word that I say one day when I stand before Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior. I understand that. And that's why, I would have been more, I wouldn't have said those things. Let's just put it that way. I would not have said that.
You're not for wiping out civilization.
Absolutely not.
I mean, what for wiping out the income tax?
Yeah, if we can get that far on it, we would. But again, my point is property tax helps everyone. Those who are pushing income tax are multi-millionaires, maybe billionaires, because that's going to help them the most.
But is it disingenuous for some of your colleagues who are running who have said, I'll get rid of the income tax? They cannot get rid of the income tax. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
So should there be an asterisk or an addendum to that statement that says, if I can get the votes in the legislature?
Yeah, I would also say to run around saying I'm going to refund everybody $47.47. What about people that are on Social Security? They're not going to get a $47,000 or $4,747 rebate. That's not going to happen. So you have to be careful with what you say, and that's why I'm very careful not to make promises that I can't fulfill.
Returning back to property tax just very quickly, what would be your plan to supplement the money that is raised for that for state revenues, should you be successful in your bid for governor and axing it?
Thank you. The first part is when you look at what's going on in governments, whether it's the state, local governments, all those budgets are way bloated. And there's a crisis in the government right now that we are having. What that simply means we have to get back to the basics. What is government all about? That's what we have to ask. What is it there for? Quickly, police and fire, infrastructure, security, secure elections, education, and, in my opinion, decentralizing Lansing from overreach and override.
Pastor, I got to get out to do close credits, but you'll stay for a little bit of overtime?
For sure.
Absolutely. All right. Go to the WKAR.org for more of our conversation with the pastor after you look at these closed credits. Thanks for tuning in.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.